The electric razor buzzed menacingly as it moved toward Marcus Chen's left eyebrow. 4 seniors held him down against the cold bathroom tiles, their laughter echoing off the cracked mirrors of Lincoln Prep's forgotten third-floor restroom. Smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with teenage cologne and something else. Something metallic that Marcus recognized from a different life, a different continent. Fear. "Hold still, transfer boy," sneered Jake Morrison, the razor trembling slightly in his oversized hand. "We're just giving you the Lincoln welcome. Every new kid gets marked." The other 3, Brett, Carson, and Malik, pressed harder, their knees digging into Marcus's shoulders and arms. They thought they had cornered some weak scholarship kid from the wrong side of town. They thought this was just another Tuesday afternoon power trip. They had no idea they were restraining someone who had been trained to kill with his bare hands before his 15th birthday. The razor moved closer, its mechanical whir growing louder. Marcus felt the familiar coldness spreading through his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced in the mountains of Afghanistan when insurgents had surrounded his unit's position. His breathing slowed. His pulse dropped from panic to predatory. The bathroom seemed to shift into slow motion, every detail crystallizing with lethal clarity. Jake's wrist position. Vulnerable. Brett's knee placement. Exposed. Carson's grip. Sloppy. Malik's attention. Divided. 4 targets. Multiple exit strategies. Time to engagement. 3 seconds. Marcus opened his eyes, and for the first time since arriving at Lincoln Prep 3 weeks ago, he stopped pretending to be helpless. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." But let me rewind and tell you how a quiet kid with gentle eyes ended up turning a routine bullying session into something that would shut down Lincoln Preparatory Academy for a full week. Because what happened in that bathroom wasn't just about defending yourself. It was about what happens when predators mistake a sleeping wolf for prey. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus Chen had walked through the wrought iron gates of Lincoln Preparatory Academy, carrying a beat-up backpack and secrets that would have made the admissions board tear up his acceptance letter. The school sat on 30 manicured acres in suburban Connecticut. Its Gothic Revival architecture, designed to intimidate parents into believing their tuition money was buying excellence. 2,000 students moved through hallways lined with oil portraits of distinguished alumni, most of whom had never worked a day outside their family's money. Marcus kept his head down, navigating the social labyrinth with practiced invisibility. He had learned the art of disappearing during his 3 years at different military bases around the world, trailing behind his father, Colonel David Chun, as the family moved from posting to posting. Fort Bragg to Kandahar to Ramstein Air Base, each location teaching him new ways to blend into the background until it was time to move again. But Lincoln Prep was supposed to be different, permanent. His father had retired from active duty, taking a consulting position with a defense contractor in Hartford. For the first time since Marcus was 12, they were staying put. The plan was simple: keep quiet, get good grades, earn a scholarship to a decent college, and build the normal life his mother had always wanted for him. The plan lasted exactly 18 hours. Marcus first noticed Jake Morrison during morning assembly, when the 6'3" senior shoved a freshman into a locker with casual violence that reminded Marcus of the way certain soldiers treated captured insurgents. The same dead-eyed cruelty, the same assumption that might made right. Jake ruled Lincoln Prep through fear and family connections, his father serving on the school's board of trustees while funding a new athletics wing. The Morrison name carried weight that transcended teenage hierarchies. Jake wore it like armor, protecting him from consequences that might have destroyed lesser bullies. He moved through the school with his 3 satellites, Brett Williams, Carson Davies, and Malik Thompson, each one desperate to maintain their position in his toxic orbit. Marcus learned the ecosystem quickly. Lincoln Prep operated on a rigid caste system disguised as academic excellence. At the top sat the legacy students, children of politicians and CEOs whose donations kept the school's endowment healthy. Below them came the athletic scholarships, talented athletes recruited to maintain the school's competitive reputation. Next were the academic achievers, brilliant kids whose test scores boosted the school's rankings. At the bottom lived the miscellaneous scholarships, students like Marcus whose presence served specific institutional needs. His application had mentioned his father's military service and his own international experience, code words that helped the school claim diversity without addressing their actual lack of minority representation. Marcus understood his place in this hierarchy. He attended classes, completed assignments with quiet efficiency, and ate lunch alone in the library while reading military history texts that reminded him of better times. He made no friends, joined no clubs, spoke only when directly questioned by teachers, the perfect invisible student. His mother, Sarah Chen, worked 12-hour shifts as a trauma surgeon at Hartford Hospital, trying to rebuild the career that military life had interrupted. She left before dawn and returned after dark, trusting Marcus to handle his own transition to civilian teenage life. She had no idea how poorly equipped he was for normal adolescent challenges. Because Marcus Chen wasn't normal. While other 15-year-olds had been playing video games and learning to drive, Marcus had been acquiring skills that would have impressed Special Forces operatives. His father, recognizing the dangerous isolation of constant relocation, had arranged for private training sessions disguised as after-school activities. Combat shooting with Master Sergeant Rodriguez in Kandahar. Close quarters combat with Sergeant First Class Kim at Fort Bragg. Tactical awareness with Captain Morrison at Ramstein. Each instructor had been carefully selected, each lesson designed to prepare Marcus for threats that most American teenagers would never imagine. The training had saved his life twice. Once during a Taliban attack on the base school in Afghanistan. Once during an attempted kidnapping outside the American compound in Germany. Both incidents had been classified, reported as equipment malfunctions. Rather than the deliberate targeting of American military families, Marcus had learned to kill efficiently and quietly. More importantly, he had learned when killing was necessary and when other options existed. His father had been very clear about that distinction, understanding that his son would eventually need to function in a world where lethal force was rarely the appropriate response. But standing in that bathroom, feeling Jake Morrison's breath on his face while 3 other predators held him down, Marcus realized his father's careful lessons about restraint were about to be tested in ways neither of them had anticipated. The first real collision happened in advanced placement history, during a discussion about counterinsurgency tactics in Vietnam. Marcus had been sitting in his usual spot, 3rd row from the back, near the window where he could monitor both entrances, while appearing to stare outside. 3 weeks of careful observation had taught him the rhythms of Lincoln Prep, the unspoken rules that govern student interactions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mr. Fitzgerald, an aging veteran of prestigious New England prep schools, loved nothing more than intellectual combat disguised as classroom discussion. He thrived on pitting student against student, watching privileged teenagers struggle to defend positions they had never seriously examined. Today's topic was the Phoenix program, the CIA's controversial assassination campaign during the Vietnam War. The question, Mr. Fitzgerald announced, his gray beard trembling with academic excitement, is whether targeted elimination of enemy infrastructure represents legitimate warfare or state-sponsored terrorism. Miss Whitman, please begin. Catherine Whitman, daughter of a federal appeals court judge, launched into a practiced condemnation of American overreach in Southeast Asia. Her argument flowed smoothly, hitting all the expected points about civilian casualties and international law. Marcus listened with growing irritation, recognizing the comfortable moral certainty of someone who had never faced actual violence. Jake Morrison raised his hand, his jaw set in the stubborn expression that preceded his most aggressive pronouncements. "That's typical liberal garbage," he said, not bothering to wait for acknowledgement. "Sometimes you have to fight dirty to win. My grandfather was in Vietnam." He said the only mistake we made was not hitting them harder. The classroom tension spiked immediately. Jake's family mythology included a grandfather who had allegedly served with distinction in the Marine Corps, though Marcus had noticed inconsistencies in the stories that suggested significant embellishment. Jake used these war stories as social weapons, claiming inherited authority on matters of combat and sacrifice. "Violence is always a failure of diplomacy," Catherine shot back, her cheeks flushing with righteous anger. "Civilized nations don't assassinate people." "Tell that to the families of dead American soldiers," Jake said, his voice rising. "Sometimes killing the enemy before they kill you is the only option." Marcus felt his hands tighten involuntarily. Both students were wrong, but in different ways that revealed their fundamental ignorance about the realities of modern warfare. The Phoenix program had been a disaster not because it was morally questionable, but because it had been tactically incompetent, targeting the wrong people while missing actual threats. "Mr. Chen," Mr. Fitzgerald said suddenly, his eyes gleaming with pedagogical mischief, "you've been remarkably quiet. Perhaps you have insights to share about American military strategy?" Every head in the classroom turned toward Marcus. He felt the familiar weight of unwanted attention, the same sensation he had experienced in military briefing rooms when senior officers expected him to contribute beyond his apparent age and rank. He could deflect, give some generic response about the complexity of war, and fade back into invisibility. Instead, something inside him rebelled against the comfortable ignorance surrounding him. The Phoenix program failed because it prioritized body counts over intelligence gathering, Marcus said quietly. "You can't defeat an insurgency by killing random targets. You have to understand the network structure, identify genuine leadership nodes, and disrupt communication systematically." Most of the people killed were low-level operators or civilians caught in the wrong place. The classroom went silent. Marcus realized he had made a serious mistake, revealing knowledge that no normal 16-year-old should possess. Jake Morrison's eyes narrowed with predatory interest, recognizing something dangerous in Marcus's clinical analysis. "How exactly would you know that?" Jake asked, his voice carrying a new edge. "You read that in some textbook?" Marcus felt the trap closing around him. He could lie, claim he had researched the topic extensively, but Jake's expression suggested he would not accept easy explanations. The other students watched with the hungry attention of spectators, anticipating blood. "My father served in Afghanistan," Marcus said carefully. He talked about the differences between effective and ineffective counterinsurgency strategies. "Oh really?" Jake said, leaning forward like a shark detecting blood in the water. "What did Daddy tell you about killing terrorists?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus understood that Jake was probing, looking for weakness or contradiction he could exploit. The rest of the class held its breath, sensing drama unfolding but missing the deeper currents of threat and assessment. "He said that violence without understanding is just revenge," Marcus replied, "and revenge doesn't win wars." Jake's face darkened. He had been expecting either weakness he could mock or aggression he could challenge. Marcus's calm philosophical response frustrated his need for dramatic confrontation. Worse, it made Jake look intellectually shallow by comparison, a humiliation he could not tolerate in front of his peers. "Easy to talk philosophy when you've never actually fought anyone," Jake said, his voice thick with contempt. "Bet you've never even been in a real fight." Marcus met his gaze steadily, recognizing the challenge ritual from his observations of prison hierarchies and tribal warfare patterns. Jake was establishing dominance through verbal aggression, testing whether Marcus would submit or escalate. Either response would serve Jake's purposes, confirming his position as the classroom's apex predator. "I don't look for fights," Marcus said simply. "That's because you're scared," Jake pressed, his confidence growing as Marcus failed to respond. Aggressively, typical military brat, all talk, no action. The bell rang, ending the class and the immediate confrontation. Students gathered their belongings with the hurried efficiency of people escaping an uncomfortable situation. Marcus packed his notebook methodically, aware that Jake and his friends were watching his every movement. As Marcus stood to leave, Jake stepped into his path, close enough that their conversation would remain private. Brett, Carson, and Malik flanked him, their body language suggesting casual conversation while actually forming an intimidation formation Marcus recognized from his training. "You think you're smarter than everyone else," Jake said quietly. "Coming in here with your military stories, trying to make the rest of us look stupid." "That wasn't my intention," Marcus replied honestly. "I don't care about your intentions." Jake said, "This is my school. These are my friends, my teachers, my territory. You're just some transfer kid who doesn't know his place yet." Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging the territorial claim without accepting subordination. Jake interpreted the gesture as submission, a misreading that would prove costly in the coming weeks. "Stay out of my way," Jake continued. "Keep your mouth shut in class. Do that, and maybe you can finish the semester without any problems." Marcus stepped around Jake without responding, walking toward the door with measured steps that suggested neither hurry nor fear. He understood that Jake had just declared informal war, establishing Marcus as a target for future attention. The smart move would be to comply, maintain his low profile, and avoid further confrontation. But as he reached the hallway, Marcus felt something stirring in his chest that had nothing to do with smart tactical decisions. Jake Morrison reminded him of certain soldiers he had known, bullies who used their position to abuse anyone weaker or different. Marcus had watched such men operate with impunity, protected by rank structure and institutional indifference. He was not in the military anymore. Different rules applied in civilian settings, rules that might favor truth over hierarchy. For the first time since arriving at Lincoln Prep, Marcus began considering possibilities beyond simple survival. That afternoon, Jake Morrison called an informal meeting of his inner circle in the weight room adjacent to the school's gymnasium. The space smelled of rubber mats and adolescent sweat, its mirrors reflecting the muscular insecurity of teenage boys trying to build intimidating physiques. Jake held court from a bench press station, his words punctuated by the rhythmic clanking of weight plates. "We have a problem," he announced to Brett, Carson, and Malik. "Transfer boy thinks he can embarrass me in class." Brett Williams, whose father owned 3 car dealerships in Hartford, nodded eagerly. "Want us to teach him some respect?" "Not yet," Jake said, his expression calculating. "First we test him, see what he's really made of. Then we show him how things work around here." The harassment began subtly, the way predators always test their prey before committing to a full attack. Marcus noticed his locker combination had been tampered with the following Wednesday morning, the mechanism sticking just enough to suggest someone had been practicing with lockpicks. His textbooks remained untouched, but small items had been rearranged with the precision of someone conducting surveillance. During lunch period, Brett Williams bumped into Marcus in the cafeteria line, sending his tray clattering to the floor. The collision appeared accidental to casual observers, but Marcus recognized the deliberate shoulder positioning and follow-through that marked it as intentional contact. He knelt to collect scattered food while Brett offered loud, false apologies that drew unwanted attention from nearby students. "Sorry about that, transfer boy," Brett said, his voice carrying just enough volume to reach surrounding tables. Guess. You need to work on your balance. Marcus cleaned up the mess without responding, understanding that any reaction would escalate the situation. He purchased another lunch and found an empty table near the windows, where he could observe the cafeteria's social dynamics while maintaining situational awareness. Jake Morrison sat with his crew at the traditional senior table, occasionally glancing in Marcus's direction with predatory satisfaction. The pattern continued throughout the week. Carson Davies stepped on Marcus's foot during chemistry lab, grinding his heel down with apparent clumsiness. Malik Thompson blocked hallway intersections just long enough to force Marcus into awkward detours. Each incident remained within the boundaries of plausible accident, but the cumulative effect created constant low-level stress that would have broken most students. Marcus endured it with the patience his father had taught him during long surveillance exercises in hostile territory. Colonel Chen had spent hours explaining the psychology of asymmetric warfare, how smaller forces could defeat larger ones through persistence and superior intelligence gathering. The key was never reacting emotionally, never giving opponents the dramatic response they craved. But maintaining that discipline required Marcus to constantly suppress instincts that had been drilled into him through 3 years of intensive training. When Carson stepped on his foot, Marcus's immediate impulse was to drive his elbow into the larger boy's solar plexus, then follow with a knee strike that would end the confrontation permanently. When Brett's shoulder checked him in the hallway, Marcus visualized the exact hand placement that would send the football player's head bouncing off the nearest locker. These were not fantasies. They were tactical assessments, automatic calculations his mind performed whenever it perceived potential threats. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had called it target acquisition syndrome, the inability to look at other humans without immediately identifying their vulnerabilities. It was a useful skill in combat zones, but potentially dangerous in civilian settings where such thinking could lead to catastrophic overreaction. Marcus compensated by increasing his after-school training regimen. He had discovered an abandoned warehouse district near the Connecticut River, its empty buildings providing space for the conditioning exercises his father had taught him. Every afternoon, he ran 5-mile circuits through industrial wasteland, his pace increasing as his frustration with Lincoln Prep's social dynamics grew more intense. The warehouse that became his primary training site had once housed textile manufacturing, its high ceilings and concrete floors perfect for practicing the movement patterns that kept his skills sharp. Marcus had rigged a basic obstacle course using shipping pallets and construction materials, creating scenarios that replicated the urban warfare environments where his specialized training had been developed. He practiced close-quarters combat sequences until his muscles screamed, working through knife defense patterns and grappling techniques that most professional soldiers would never master. The physical exertion helped calm the violent impulses that Jake Morrison's psychological campaign was designed to trigger. But it also reminded Marcus just how far his capabilities exceeded anything his classmates could imagine. During one particularly intense session, Marcus found himself wondering what would happen if he stopped holding back. Jake Morrison weighed maybe 190 pounds and had the soft muscle tone of someone whose exercise routine consisted mainly of weight room posturing. Brett Williams was larger but moved with the clumsy aggression of an amateur fighter who relied on size over technique. Marcus could disable all 4 of them in under 30 seconds without sustaining significant injury. The knowledge sat in his mind like a loaded weapon, constantly available but requiring tremendous discipline to avoid using. His father had warned him repeatedly about this temptation, explaining how superior training created responsibility rather than license. Power without restraint is just violence, Colonel Chen had said during one of their final training sessions before retirement. You have skills that could hurt people badly. That means you have an obligation to find other solutions first. But finding other solutions required Marcus to endure escalating psychological pressure that was beginning to affect his academic performance. He found himself distracted during classes, constantly scanning for threats rather than focusing on lecture material. His normally perfect grades began showing small cracks, missed assignments and unfocused test answers that reflected his growing inability to compartmentalize stress. His mother noticed the changes during one of their rare dinner conversations. Sarah Chun worked brutal hours at Hartford Hospital, but she maintained the sharp observational skills that had made her an excellent trauma surgeon. She could read vital signs in human behavior the way other doctors read medical charts. "You look tired," she said, studying Marcus across their small kitchen table. "Are you sleeping enough?" "School's been challenging," Marcus replied carefully. "Still adjusting to the academic pace." Sarah's expression suggested she wasn't fooled by his deflection. Lincoln Prep is supposed to be academically rigorous, but it shouldn't be overwhelming someone with your preparation. "Is there something else going on?" Marcus considered telling her about Jake Morrison's harassment campaign, but quickly dismissed the idea. His mother had sacrificed too much to get him into Lincoln Prep, working extra shifts and taking on additional responsibilities to afford the partial tuition their scholarship didn't cover. She needed to believe the investment was worthwhile, that Marcus was building the normal teenage life she had always wanted for him. "Just social adjustment issues," he said. "The other students come from different backgrounds. Takes time to find common ground." "Different how?" Sarah asked, her surgeon's instincts detecting evasion. Marcus struggled to explain the complex social hierarchy that governed Lincoln Prep without revealing the extent of his problems with Jake Morrison. The school's culture was unlike anything he had experienced on military bases, where rank structure provided clear chains of authority and accountability. At Lincoln Prep, power flowed through unofficial channels that prioritized family connections over merit or behavior. "Money creates different expectations," Marcus said finally. "Most of these kids have never lived anywhere else, never had to adapt to new situations. They don't know how to relate to someone with a different background." Sarah nodded, accepting his explanation while filing away concerns for future monitoring. She had learned to trust Marcus's judgment during their years of constant relocation, but she also knew that teenage social dynamics could be more vicious than adult workplace politics. "If you need help navigating any of this, let me know," she said. "I may not understand prep school culture, but I understand institutional politics." Marcus thanked her and retreated to his room, where he spent the evening researching Jake Morrison's family background through public records and social media profiles. The investigation revealed exactly what he had expected: multiple generations of inherited privilege, a pattern of minor scandals quickly covered up through family influence, and a history of using money to avoid consequences that would have destroyed other families. Jake's grandfather, the alleged Marine veteran, had actually served briefly as a supply clerk before receiving a medical discharge for chronic back problems. His father, Richard Morrison, had built his law practice through political connections, rather than legal brilliance, representing clients whose problems required influence rather than competence. The family's wealth came from real estate investments that benefited from insider information about municipal development plans. Marcus filed this intelligence carefully, understanding that knowledge of his opponent's vulnerabilities might prove useful if the situation continued escalating. But he also recognized that investigating his classmates represented a significant step toward treating them as legitimate threats rather than annoying adolescents. The following Monday brought a new development that forced Marcus to reassess his strategy entirely. He arrived at his locker to find a note taped inside, written in block letters that suggested deliberate anonymity. The message was simple and chilling: "Military brats don't belong here. Transfer somewhere else before we transfer you ourselves." Marcus examined the paper carefully, noting the quality of stationery and the particular pen type used for the lettering. The threat represented a clear escalation from nuisance harassment to direct intimidation. crossing lines that transformed the situation from teenage bullying into something approaching genuine security concerns. For the first time since arriving at Lincoln Prep, Marcus began seriously considering whether his father's retirement plan had been realistic. Some environments were simply too hostile for peaceful coexistence, regardless of individual intentions or superior capabilities. Sometimes the only winning move was tactical withdrawal before violence became inevitable. But as he folded the threatening note and placed it in his backpack, Marcus realized he had already passed the point where retreat remained a viable option. Jake Morrison had made this personal, and backing down now would only invite more aggressive future attacks. The question was no longer whether confrontation would occur, but what form it would take and who would control the circumstances when it finally happened. The ultimatum came during Friday's computer programming class, delivered with the casual cruelty that Jake Morrison had perfected over years of institutional immunity. Marcus sat at his assigned workstation, debugging a recursive algorithm that calculated Fibonacci sequences, when Jake slid into the adjacent seat with predatory confidence. Mrs. Patterson was helping another student troubleshoot syntax errors across the room, her back turned to the rest of the class. The other students worked quietly at their keyboards, absorbed in their individual projects and unaware of the tension building in the corner where Jake had positioned himself for maximum psychological impact. "We need to talk," Jake said quietly, his voice pitched below the ambient noise of cooling fans and clicking keys. "About your attitude problem." Marcus continued typing, his fingers moving steadily across the keyboard while his peripheral vision tracked Jake's body language. The larger boy had positioned himself to block the most direct path to the classroom exit, a subtle intimidation tactic that revealed more tactical awareness than Marcus had previously credited him with possessing. "My programming assignment requires concentration," Marcus replied without looking away from his screen. "Perhaps we could discuss whatever concerns you after class." Jake's jaw tightened at the polite dismissal. He had expected either immediate submission or defensive aggression, responses that would have given him clear tactical advantages. Marcus's calm professionalism frustrated his need for dramatic confrontation, while simultaneously making him appear foolish to any observers. "This isn't a request," Jake said, leaning closer until Marcus could smell the protein powder residue on his breath. "You've been making me look bad in front of teachers and other students. That stops now." Marcus saved his work and turned slightly in his chair, giving Jake his full attention for the first time during the conversation. The movement was minimal but significant, demonstrating respect for the seriousness of Jake's concerns while maintaining non-threatening posture that would appear reasonable to witnesses. "I'm not sure what specific behavior you're referring to," Marcus said. "Could you provide examples so I can better understand your perspective?" The reasonable tone and diplomatic language clearly infuriated Jake, whose face flushed with the distinctive red coloration that preceded his most aggressive displays. He had built his reputation on intimidating responses from victims, emotional reactions that justified whatever punishment he chose to inflict. Marcus's professional demeanor denied him that satisfaction while making his own aggression appear disproportionate. "Don't play dumb with me," Jake hissed. "Your little performance in history class, showing off your military knowledge, making me look stupid in front of everyone, then refusing to show proper respect when I tried to straighten you out afterward." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, processing Jake's grievances with the analytical approach his father had taught him for handling diplomatic disputes in multicultural environments. Every complaint revealed information about Jake's psychological vulnerabilities and tactical preferences, data that might prove useful if the situation continued deteriorating. "I understand you felt embarrassed by my comments during the Vietnam discussion," Marcus said carefully. "That wasn't my intention. I was simply sharing information relevant to the topic Mr. Fitzgerald had introduced." "I don't care about your intentions," Jake snapped. "I care about results." And the result is that people are starting to think you're smarter than me. That's unacceptable." The admission revealed more than Jake probably intended, exposing the fragile ego that drove his need to dominate intellectual discussions despite lacking the knowledge base to support his positions. Marcus recognized the syndrome from his observations of insecure officers who compensated for professional inadequacy through abuse of subordinates. "Intelligence isn't a competition," Marcus said. "Different people have different areas of expertise based on their backgrounds and experiences. Your knowledge of Lincoln Prep's social dynamics far exceeds mine." Jake's expression suggested he was unsure whether Marcus had just complimented or insulted him. The ambiguity was deliberate, designed to prevent escalation while avoiding outright submission. Marcus had learned the technique from watching his father navigate delicate negotiations with tribal leaders, whose cooperation was essential but whose methods were questionable. "Here's what's going to happen," Jake said, abandoning subtlety. "For direct confrontation, you're going to do my computer programming project, and my history paper that's due next week, and anything else I need help with for the rest of the semester." The forged summons confirmed that Jake Morrison's crew had escalated to active deception, using institutional authority to manipulate Marcus's movement patterns in preparation for their planned confrontation. Marcus deleted the voicemail he had been preparing for his father and instead activated the digital recorder, understanding that documenting the upcoming incident might prove crucial for legal protection. He made his way toward the guidance office as requested, but took a circuitous route that allowed him to observe potential ambush positions while maintaining the appearance of compliance. The third-floor bathroom near the guidance counselor's suite had been chosen perfectly for Jake's purposes. It was isolated from main traffic patterns rarely used during afternoon classes and equipped with only one entrance that could be easily controlled. Marcus paused outside the door, listening to voices that confirmed the presence of multiple hostiles inside. He could have simply walked away, reported the forged summons to school administrators, and allowed Lincoln Prep's disciplinary system to handle the situation through official channels. But 3 weeks of systematic harassment had convinced Marcus that institutional authority was insufficient to address Jake Morrison's behavior, particularly given his family's influence over school board decisions. Marcus pushed open the bathroom door and stepped inside, immediately cataloging tactical details that would determine his survival options. 4 targets positioned strategically around the room's perimeter. Multiple improvised weapons available from maintenance supplies. Single exit route that could be blocked but not permanently sealed. Adequate lighting for precise movement. Concrete surfaces that would amplify sound and potentially cause serious injury during physical confrontation. Jake Morrison stood near the sinks, holding an electric razor that buzzed with mechanical menace. Brett Williams and Carson Davies flanked the entrance, while Malik Thompson positioned himself near the window that provided the room's only natural illumination. Their formation revealed both tactical awareness and crucial vulnerabilities that Marcus's training allowed him to identify immediately. "Glad you could join us," Jake said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a predator who believed his trap had worked perfectly. "Time for your Lincoln Prep initiation." Marcus set his backpack down carefully, the movement appearing compliant, while actually providing him with better mobility for the combat sequence he was already visualizing. The digital recorder continued running in his pocket, capturing evidence that might prove essential for explaining whatever happened next. "This doesn't have to escalate," Marcus said calmly. "You can still walk away without anyone getting hurt." Jake's laugh carried genuine amusement, as if Marcus had just told a particularly funny joke. "The only person who's going to get hurt is you. We're just going to make you look a little more interesting, one eyebrow at a time." The razor moved closer to Marcus's face as Brett and Carson grabbed his shoulders, forcing him down toward the cold tile floor. Their grip was strong but amateur, relying on size and numerical advantage rather than proper restraint techniques. Marcus allowed himself to be pushed downward while calculating angles and leverage points that would transform their apparent control into devastating vulnerability. Malik Thompson moved to pin Marcus's legs, completing the formation that Jake believed would render his victim helpless. The four seniors surrounded their target with the confidence of predators who had never encountered genuine resistance, unaware that they were restraining someone whose training had prepared him for far more dangerous situations than high school. Bathroom confrontations. The electric razor buzzed inches from Marcus's left eyebrow when he stopped pretending to be helpless. His right hand shot upward with explosive precision, fingers closing around Jake's wrist like a steel trap while his left palm drove into the larger boy's elbow joint. The combined motion created a perfect lever that sent Jake spinning through the air before his nervous system could process what was happening. The razor flew across the bathroom and shattered against the concrete wall. Brett Williams tried to maintain his grip on Marcus's shoulder, but found himself pulled forward by momentum he couldn't control. Marcus rolled backward, using Brett's own weight to flip the football player head over heels into the nearest sink. The porcelain cracked with a sound like breaking bones, and Brett crumpled to the floor with blood streaming from his scalp. Carson Davies released his hold and swung a wild haymaker that would have knocked out most opponents. Marcus slipped. The punch, with minimal movement, caught Carson's extended arm and applied a standing armbar that brought the larger boy to his knees with a scream that echoed off the bathroom walls. Malik Thompson scrambled backward toward the exit, his hands raised in surrender. "Stop! I'm done! I'm out!" Marcus released Carson, who collapsed clutching his hyperextended elbow, and turned his attention to Jake Morrison. The ringleader had recovered from his initial shock and was reaching for a broken piece of porcelain that could serve as an improvised weapon. "Don't," Marcus said quietly. Jake's hand froze halfway to the ceramic shard. Something in Marcus's voice, some quality that spoke of experiences beyond normal teenage conflict, convinced him that further aggression would result in consequences he was not prepared to face. The bathroom door burst open as Principal Williams arrived with 2 security guards, drawn by sounds of combat that had carried through the building's ventilation system. His expression shifted from stern authority to shocked disbelief as he surveyed the scene of destruction. Jake Morrison sat on the floor with tears streaming down his face, cradling his injured wrist. Brett Williams remained unconscious near the broken sink, blood pooling beneath his head. Carson Davies whimpered softly while examining his damaged elbow. Only Malik Thompson appeared physically unharmed, though his face showed the psychological trauma of witnessing violence beyond his comprehension. Marcus stood in the center of the bathroom, his clothes torn but otherwise unmarked, breathing steadily despite having just defeated 4 larger opponents in under 30 seconds. "What happened here?" Principal Williams demanded. Marcus reached into his pocket and produced the digital recorder, its red light still blinking. "I have audio documentation of the entire incident, sir. These students lured me here with a forged summons and attempted to assault me with an electric razor." The recording played Jake Morrison's threats with crystal clarity, followed by sounds of the brief but decisive combat that had ended their harassment campaign permanently. Principal Williams's expression darkened as he realized the legal implications of what had occurred under his institution's supervision. Paramedics arrived to treat Brett Williams's concussion and Carson Davies's injured elbow. Police officers took statements from all participants while reviewing the audio evidence that clearly established Marcus as the victim of a coordinated attack. Jake Morrison's family lawyer appeared within an hour, but found little room for maneuvering, given the electronic documentation of his client's criminal behavior. The aftermath rippled through Lincoln Prep like an earthquake, destroying social hierarchies that had existed for generations. Jake Morrison was expelled immediately, his college prospects ruined by criminal charges that his family's influence could not suppress. Brett Williams faced suspension and medical bills that his father's car dealerships could barely afford. Carson Davies and Malik Thompson received lesser punishments, but lost their positions on the football team. Marcus became a different kind of legend, respected rather than feared, admired for standing up to institutional bullying that everyone had tolerated for too long. Students who had suffered similar harassment found their voices, reporting incidents. That led to systematic reforms in Lincoln Prep's disciplinary policies. Sarah Chun arrived at the school to find her son sitting calmly in the principal's office, apparently uninjured despite having defended himself against 4 attackers. The pride in her eyes mixed with concern about the violence her quiet son had been forced to unleash. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine, Mom," Marcus replied. "But I think it's time to tell you about the training Dad really gave me." 3 months later, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at Lincoln Prep, delivering a presentation about conflict resolution and personal safety to students who hung on every word. The boy who had once sought invisibility now served as a role model for those who refused to accept victimization as an inevitable part of adolescent experience. Jake Morrison's attempt to humiliate him with an electric razor had revealed not a victim, but a protector who would help transform Lincoln Prep into a place where strength was measured by character rather than cruelty. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from the battles we choose, but from the ones that choose us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.